Can you talk a little about how you got involved in this project, the genesis of this project?
I'm going to hand that over to Annette.
I'm an extremely fortunate person because about 40 years ago, I met Marion Wiesel at the Cannes Film Festival, by the way. She is as much a cinephile as she is a brilliant writer, speaker, thinker, philanthropist, and friend. I had met Elie Wiesel shortly before that because I was writing a book that would become Indelible Shadows, Film and the Holocaust, which was the first published book on the subject back in 1983. And I met him because I had seen Siget Siget, a documentary short by Harold Becker, from which excerpts are visible in this film. And he and I, Elie Wiesel and I, really disagreed about films a lot. Once we got to know each other, we had extremely polite but rigid arguments because he rightly questioned fiction films that were made about the Holocaust. I, being the child of survivors, not one myself, I tried to accept every film in its own terms. And over the next 40 years, I benefited from their friendship. And after Elie Wiesel died, a lot of filmmakers started asking, could they make a documentary? And this went on. Alicia Wiesel, they would check in with me periodically with various requests. Could I vet them? Did I know these filmmakers? And in almost all cases, they were worthy, but I did not feel that particular spark of connection between a filmmaker and a subject as important as Elie, his family, his legacy. And it was my husband, Mark Ethan Toporek, sitting there, who reminded me how much we had appreciated the documentary that Oren and Menachem made called Hiding and Seeking in 2012. And we realized there was a match there, a sensibility that was anchored in both, well, to use the end quotation from Elie Wiesel, belief and knowledge, and faith. Well, he said belief, faith and knowledge. And we introduced them, and slowly but surely, a film germinated. And then I realized that we were right, because though Menachem died before the film could be completed, Oren brought to the film not just art, but extend the word a little, heart. This is a film that manifests the depth of emotional resonance as well as artistic achievement.
So true.
Thank you, Annette.
So Oren, how do you just approach making a film about such a crucial figure, not only in Jewish history, but in history?
With some trepidation, fear, and excitement, enthusiasm, and faith, if I didn't already say that. But really, the question was how to make Elie's life a film, because his life has many chapters to it, and many of which are not on the screen. There's much of what makes Elie Wiesel remarkable, which is not here. And I urge you, if you like this film, to go to the 92nd Street Y Archives, which has more than 30 years of Elie's lectures on tape, audio, and also in the latter years on film. And so there's a whole nother story there of his Hasidic teachings and stories about biblical figures, and they're really remarkable archives. But very early on, I think, in discussions with Annette and then with the family, we said, this has to be in Elie's own words, and not just in his own words, but in his own voice. He has to narrate his own story. And so that became the guiding principle, number one. And number two, it's the key story is the story of his memoir, Night, and his own personal journey is one of recovery, of growing up in this many ways idyllic life in Siget, Romania, And then the Holocaust comes out of nowhere for Hungarian Jews in 1944, and that excruciating trauma that he went through, and then his recovery. And so that became the heart of the film and the soul of the film. And Soul on Fire is the name, Souls on Fire is the name of one of his books about Hasidic masters, a wonderful book, by the way. But so that became structurally really, really important, his own voice. And then expanding to, the fact that his life, and I think Marion played a huge role in his expanding life, because he, after all, grew up in a small city in Romania, and he thought he would become a rabbi or a teacher of students, and that, in fact, also became one of my guiding principles, is that Elie always said, "I'm a teacher." Well, he said a lot of things, but one of the things that stuck was how important teaching was to him, and that's why it led me to that wonderful school in Newark, and yes.
It's kind of extraordinary the way you elegantly navigate the tone, because it's both devastating and full of humanity and hope. And so when you approached it, did you make a decision that this film is not only going to be about this devastation of history, but it is going to be such an uplifting?
Well, yeah. Well, one of the things that I'm really sad isn't in the film, because so many people told me how funny Elie Wiesel was and how good his sense of humor was, and the other thing that saddens me is all these wonderful interviews that are on the cutting room floor. But in terms of the tone of the film, I certainly didn't want to use those horrific images of devastation, of the Holocaust, of dead bodies and all that. I just didn't feel like that would represent what is important about Elie, because Elie, as Ted Comet in the film says much more eloquently than I'm going to say now, is he took the trauma, and as Ingrid Anderson and several others, and made something else out of it. And he gave us all that gift. And if anything else, that film had to go there, had to go to what he gave us. He gave us all. And as a matter of fact, when he taught at Boston University, he didn't very frequently teach Holocaust literature. He taught world literature, and that defined who he was. And finally, the thing that I think, and I want to hear what Annette has to say about this too, but for him, when he was at the Sorbonne, a big influence was Camus. And Camus said, what's most important is this, one person to another, making a friend and friendship. That's what, makes the world and life worth living. But please.
It's true that if you were to look at some of the 92nd Street Y classes that he taught, there is so much joy and laughter. And once I got to know him, he loved jokes, he loved to sing. And the thing that has remained most in my head whenever I think of Elie Wiesel, which is actually very, very often, no matter what he said, whether it was something depressing based on his experiences of the war and what he saw as ongoing indifference and violence in this world, or whether he was telling something upbeat that was meant to be for resilience and inspiration, he would add 2 words, and yet would follow so many of his sentences. And even though we don't have any of that directly in the film, when Oren and I discussed this from the very beginning, it was never going to be a portrait of the darkest aspects of Elie Wiesel's life and writings. It was always meant to be, well, if a soul is on fire, unless it consumes itself, which it did not in this case, it lights a spark. There's a kind of match that touches others, whether you are a student in the 7th grade in an academy or in Germany in an annual reading of Night, or a student at Columbia University. Some of my students have been deeply moved by his work. Elie Wiesel's story is one of resilience and one of faith.
How did you connect with North Star Academy?
It all comes from going to shul, going to synagogue. It's very important because you never know who you're going to meet there and who I met there, or church or youth group or whatever. But I met this guy in my study class named Todd Levine, who taught at North Star Academy, and I said, oh, do they by any chance teach Elie Wiesel's Night? And he said, yes, as a matter of fact, we do. And he said, yeah, we have this curriculum, and that a 5 to 6 week curriculum of reading Night. And then I contacted various people, and then one day I had a Zoom with Paris Murray, who said, hey, we can make this happen. But it wasn't that. It was also just Paris blew my mind, as I don't want to embarrass her too much, but she's an extraordinary teacher and human being. And so she and made it happen, and I walked into that classroom, and it was all business. And if you go there, you'll see it's business. It ain't like other schools you've been to. They take their education very seriously. The kids are better behaved than, I don't know where they came from, but their parents have a lot to do with it. Madison's mother, I think, is here. Yes, thank you, Madison's mother and all the parents there. So that's how it happened.
Can you talk about the use of animation in this film?
Yes, animation. Our animator was here the other night, Joel Orloff, and well, again, I didn't want to show those images. I don't believe in I'm not myself in favor of showing images of dead people who never gave permission to have their images shown, so that's just me. But so animation came to mind, and also there were the dreams that I discovered Elie had recorded certain sections of his autobiography, which is at the 92nd Street Y, where those recordings are from. And so those dreams, for some reason, haunted me. And there were several of them. We ended up using 3 or 4 of them. But and there were no images to go with them. And then there were the rest of the stories he told. And so I knew Joel Orloff from a previous film he worked on with me called Witness Theater. And my first documentary actually had animation in it. So I asked him to paint. I wanted it to be very tangible. He painted on glass, and what painting on glass will do, and William Kentridge, who's a brilliant animator, does that kind of hand painting. And what it does is, because you're moving the paint around, it evokes for me memory. And memory is sort of crucial to what this film is about and what Elie Wiesel was about, and I think what I try to do with my films too. And so it grew, though. We didn't know it was going to end up being 14 minutes, and that became a labor that involved a dozen animators in the end. So that's where it came from. I think it suits the project well.
And how much did you interact with the family? Were you showing them, were you talking to them about what you were using, what your intentions were, or did you just show up and say, here's my fine cut?
I really thank the family for having so much faith, because I didn't show anybody anything. I did show Marion. First, I had to convince Marion and Alicia that I could, and Menachem at the time, could make the film, but then one of the rules of making documentary films is you can't, once you break the fourth wall and show people what you're doing, they no longer can be, very few people can be in a film then and not imagine what's going on. So they gave real faith and trust until very late in the project, when I did show Marion and Lynn the project, and then Alicia and Elijah and Marion and Annette, of course, the nearly finished film. There was a lot yet, and thankfully they're here, and they didn't walk out today. So no, they gave my approval, and as they know, they're tough customers, so thank you so much for believing in the project.
Or in our last moment that we have here, what's your next project?
Well, there's some ideas I'm kicking around, but I'm finishing a film that Menachem had started, but that's not really my next project. That is my next project, but I think The Brutalist needs a sequel, don't you? No. Anyway, I don't know.
So, well, thank you for this powerful, compelling, beautiful film. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. We'll be out front later.